Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Doherty and managing partner of Promise Venture Studio, and we're so excited to have everyone here today to talk about the Promising Venture Fellowship. And we have some amazing folks from last year's 2019 Promising Fellowship to join and talk in their own words about their experience, which we think will be particularly valuable to all of you who are considering applying or maybe already in that process. So thanks for joining us today. I'm based in New York, and we'll have folks from all around the country today, but just wanted to welcome those that are particularly on earlier time zones, and thanks for getting started with us. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to just do a brief overview of Promise Venture Studio and our work and how that sets a context for the kind of experience that the fellowship really can offer. And then we're going to jump right into it. And as I mentioned, we have three speakers from very different circumstances and different types of ventures, and I'll let them introduce those in more detail. We'll go for 30 minutes or so in their words, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A that's more collective as well. So this, I'll just set out right from the very beginning. This experience today is really about helping you surface questions about whether fellowship is right for you, whether the demands of the fellowship and the opportunities are kind of the right match for you in this moment. So it's a really supportive and open group, and we just encourage you to be as engaging as possible. It's absolutely not meant to be a one-to-many kind of webinar where you just kind of monitor it and do something else. This is really about helping you address the questions that may be just in the moment for you about this experience. And then finally, and maybe for some of you, really importantly, because we're in the throes of the application, we've got specific steps on the application, kind of what needs to happen to actually get it in. I'll talk a little bit from our perspective at Promise about some of the different components and how you might think about sort of presenting yourself in the best and kind of most favorable way. And then we'll call it a day. We have some additional support next week as well. So this isn't only it. And the core of today really is about sharing the voices of last year's fellows. So please feel free to use the chat function as we go. And I see some thank yous already. And that's where we'll keep track of questions. And we'll also be happy to kind of interrupt in context and address them as they come up. So this is our vision at Promise Venture Studio. And we envision a world where all children, no matter their background, can fulfill their innate promise. And we love this little visual, and you may have noticed them on the front page as well, the first page of the deck, because it really boils down to, can we make sure that every child gets the rocket ship that they need to achieve what really is their true and potential life outcome. And so we know that starts early. That's the real focus of our work, is newborn through 5 in the US. And we think the fellowship is a critical piece of kind of making that happen. But this is why the Promise team and the community of innovators that are forming around our work really gets up every day and kind of drives our energy. We believe that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And we know that every one of you on this call really is committing your life energy in some way to changing this. So again, a thank you for all of you for what you do. And so much that you put into it. It really is making a difference. And I think we're, potentially seeing a tipping point in early childhood. So this is our theory of change. And the way that we think about our work is really that we attract, we support, and then connect talent and money to our field. Because it takes all of those things to really see change. When we do, it's about supporting innovations to grow into organizations with both scale and impact. And we'll talk in a minute about why those things often don't necessarily go together. And in turn, we think that attracts more great people, more financial support, more good feedback. And most importantly, we know it results in better outcomes for children and families facing the greatest adversity. So, I mean, I don't need to share with each of you, you're working on individual problems, but collectively, if you step back and think about the problems that we're trying to address as a community of early childhood innovators, using, let's say, kindergarten readiness gap as one indicator, they're incredibly complex and they're entrenched obstacles at the system level. So we know it takes innovative approaches, it takes lots of support, it takes plenty of positive feedback to create momentum. But if we measured it just by the growth of the Promise Venture community since last year's fellowship, or since we got started just 2 years ago, the momentum really is building and a tipping point is possible. And our fellowship really is a central piece of that momentum. So thanks to the guys who are on the phone today and also all of their peer fellows from last year for getting it all started in the inaugural cohort. This is us, small but mighty team. We are all very passionate and mission driven about the work that we do. You may have, that's me in the bottom right-hand corner. I'll just kind of walk across. That's Matt Glickman, co-founder, next to me to the left. Kate Wild, program manager for us, who joined us about a year and a half ago and is doing great work in our programs. Karen Lean, who had a background at Y Combinator and works in our programs as well. Awara, who is running today's webinar behind the scenes and my partner in the fellowship work, joined us from the primary school recently and has a great background for impact in our work. Chelsea Sprarigan, entrepreneur in residence at Promise, and her entrepreneurial venture right now is Pie for Providers in the childcare world. And then Gabe Hakim, who comes to us from both from nonprofit world and also from McKinsey and is a co-founder as well. And Kylie Burke, who was the prior CEO at Teaching Strategy. So collectively, we constitute really a group of very mission-driven leaders who believe that building this field and supporting all of you in this community of innovation is really the way to see the greatest change in outcomes. And I want to urge you to apply to the fellowship, and this won't be the last time I'll do it for today, so just a warning there, but by July 30th, because when you do, one of the things that you'll get as an immediate win is you'll gain immediate visibility with each of our team members who, collectively we have deep networks across early childhood. So you literally win kind of just by getting in the game with the fellowship. And then I'll talk briefly about the fellowship before we introduce the speakers, and they'll get into kind of more of their specific expertise. But if you're not aware, it's a 12-week virtual program for early childhood social entrepreneurs who are pursuing impact and growth goals. I mentioned earlier that those things often don't come together so at the same rate. So one example may be that you are early stage and you have an inkling of what impact looks like. Maybe you're coming out of some very small scale research that has a lot of promise in terms of what it could mean for the field if it were expanded. So you have maybe lots of evidence, but not so much scale. Or maybe you have lots of scale, but you haven't been focused particularly on impact. And now you're turning your attention more toward communities and families that are facing the most adversity, and how can you bring the work that you have scaled so effectively otherwise to all children and families. So wherever you fall in that dimension, we think that there's really something for you. And we're really excited about bringing back the Center on Developing Child from Harvard University, that team, who was with us last year, and our newest partner, Sesame Workshop, who's going to be offering some mentoring specifically from their team as a supplement to what we're doing in the workshop as well. So across these three organizations, we think it's pretty cool. And I would just say, again, by applying, you don't just get on the map with all of the Promise team, you also get on the map with these two amazing teams as well. So just another invitation to jump into to chat and leave questions. I'll be monitoring that as we go, and happy to address things that come up more directly. But now let me shift gears and introduce our panel to you. I'm going to do it one by one, and the goal here really is to let you hear from some of the leaders of the 2019 fellowship cohort. There were 12 venture teams with whom we worked, and this is really a way for you to hear very much in their words what it felt like for them. Maybe everything from the application process to today, almost a year later. And we've included each of our three leaders and asked them to kind of speak for 5 or 6 minutes on their own and talk a bit about their experience. also about a few topics that came up from your pre-submitted questions. So I've had a look at those, and we've found a way to incorporate those, and I'll also jump in from time to time and ask some of those as well. So don't be shy. This is very open and supportive. And with that, let's jump forward and introduce our first speaker. And Erasma, at least on my screen, is appearing on the far right. So not sure where she appears for you. But Erasma Barros Monticello is the executive director of Power of Two in New York. So we're practically neighbors. And Erasma is a native New Yorker, and she grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn, where she co-founded Power of Two in 2015. And she's going to talk a lot more about Brownsville and also about her experience in fellowship and really scaling for the first time from that first community where Power of Two really got its momentum going. And I'm just going to read briefly from her LinkedIn profile because I thought it was really well done. I have to admit, Erasmus, usually I jump past that little like intro section and LinkedIn, like just see, hey, where are they now? But yours really caught me because I think it captures you so well in your work. And it says, as the executive director, she uses science and community experience to mitigate the negative impact of intergenerational family trauma to build resilient and thriving communities. That's really it. Through her work, Erasma lives her values every day, ensuring that children in New York's most vulnerable communities have opportunities to dream and achieve beyond their present circumstances. In the fellowship, Erasma focused her work really on two things, and I think she'll unpack this a little bit for you. The first was, and by the way, as I go through these with each speaker, I just want to point out how marvelous a job they did at being specific in their application and then in the fellowship process about their growth goal or their impact goals. And I think I would just urge you, if you're considering applying, there's probably not too much specificity you can have in that, because that's really the primary criteria that we're looking at to figure out if there's a fit. And in the process, it helps you really kind of build a pathway to scaled impact. So the first was developing sort of an action plan generally about how to package their knowledge at Power of Two in technical assistance and potentially start getting the word out to other players in the field, kind of on a nationwide basis of how to access that knowledge. And one of the wonderful things about, the nonprofit world is it's not about invent, shield, and keep. It's about invent, promulgate, and make it available to everyone. And so that was kind of the first motivation around the fellowship. And then the second was very tactically like, hey, we're in Brownsville, and we would like to move to a second community in the Bronx. What would it take? And so we were helpful, I think, in supporting that thinking. So Erasma, first off, great to have you back with us. It's amazing to see you again.
To be here.
And let me just open it up with, how's Brownsville and the other communities you're serving during this pandemic?
Yeah, thanks, Michael, and everyone for having me here. I'm happy to be able to share our experience and learn from each of you. Things in Brownsville and in the communities that we serve now in the South Bronx are a little slower than the rest of New York City. Even though we're in the reopening stages, the communities themselves are not yet ready for reopening. We're still experiencing very high rates of infection in Brownsville at 30%, and in the South Bronx, we're still at 38%. And so, we get this feeling that the state is moving on, but our communities aren't. And so we're on the front lines, working very closely with our community and community partners to really ourselves do the collective grassroots work to ensure our communities, safety and well-being.
Amazing. Yeah. Thanks for that update. And I just didn't,
Sure.
I'll give you the floor and maybe start with a kind of an intro, a deeper detail on what I did at Power of Two, and then.
Sure, absolutely. So as Michael mentioned, I am co-founder and now executive director of Power of Two. Really the goal of our organization is to nurture the inherent potential in every child and family so that they can transform their own lives and strengthen their own communities. And the way that we do this is really by providing an evidence-based in-home parent coaching model that centers the family experience to help parents heal from past trauma, a lot of it related to racial trauma, and build their sensitive parenting skills to support their child's development, but also to help their communities thrive. And When Michael and I chatted last year around this time about the Promise Venture Fellowship, I was 6 months into the role of executive director, kind of trying to navigate and steer the ship as the co-founder had decided that she wanted to transition out of the organization. And so I shared very directly with Michael what it was that I was trying to do and the need for additional support with other leaders, and he recommended and suggested that I apply, and so I did. I participated in the fellowship with a colleague, Megan Rooney. At the time, she too was also new to her role of chief of staff, and so together we submitted our application. It took us a little bit over an hour to complete the application because we wanted to be very intentional about what it was that we wanted to achieve. So I definitely recommend that you really, spend some time on it and be thoughtful about what are the things that you really want to help your organization or even yourself, like what are your growth goals. In terms of the growth goals that Michael shared, yes, we were very intent on developing a technical assistance unit. We had been basically receiving many calls from a lot of social entrepreneurs interested in learning how we as an organization were able to weave in the science and the community approach to successfully launch in Brownsville. And so at the suggestion from the Promise team, we started to kind of like filter and really understand what the needs were, what the market was, how do we build capacity within the organization. And now we have integrated it into our strategic plan for the next 5 years. So we're very excited about that, and we're confident that the board is going to approve. The other growth goal was to establish realistic projections for scaling our internal capacity, but also our external capacity to serve more families and delve into the South Bronx and throughout the rest of New York City in the next 5 years. And the team was really incredibly helpful in helping us create a strategy that took into consideration all of the different practices and protocols that we would need to implement internally to help attract our, very specific, team members, but also retention. How do we retain? How do we, make sure that all of our systems are codified in a way that retention of our parent coaches was possible? And also thinking about how do we create messaging that would be compelling for foundations and others to really help support our growth into the South Bronx. I will say that was an incredibly powerful experience for us because as a result of our experience with Promise Venture and their very direct hands-on approach to the fellowship, we were able to create a strategy that allowed us to go from serving 50 families in one community in the South Bronx to a year later, now we're serving 3 communities in the South Bronx, in addition to Brownsville. And in this past year, we've served 1,000 children and have raised over $750,000 to be able to continue to do the work in the South Bronx and 1.2 million in Brownsville. So it's very exciting for us. My advice to you all, once you submit your application and hopefully are able to participate in the fellowship, is to bring it all to the table. Bring it all to the conversation, your concerns, your worries, your vision. If you had a magic wand, what it is that you would want to create. Make sure that you're really open with the Promise Venture team. Also, I would highly recommend that you put a lot of time and energy into, as I mentioned before, really being thoughtful about your impact and growth goals. And make sure that you carve out time within your daily work of providing, service to to, actually follow, your specific framework and your specific goals each week with the team. I also recommend that you don't do this work in a silo. Don't do it by yourself. Make sure that you tap the resources that the fellowship offers. Michael, Gabe, Karen, Matt, the entire Promise team, as well as a team from the Harvard Center of Developing Child. They were absolutely terrific in helping us rethink or reframe how we talk about trauma, really centering the experience of the families. Also spend time with your cohort. I mean, it was really beneficial for me as a new executive director to really share and also hear back, just get feedback, but also problem solve together. So there's a lot of bi-directional learning that happens, and I encourage you to be really open to that. And I think my last recommendation to you would be to be inclusive of your team, of your organizational team. You can't do this work in a vacuum, and they will really help you determine if your vision and goals are feasible. And it will help you definitely gain buy-in in the long run, which is part of what we did in this process. So even though Megan and I were the two that participated in the fellowship, we really did pull in our team members from different parts of the organization to kind of test our theory, if our theory was accurate, feasible, and if they would be excited and energized to steer the ship with us.
Rasma, that is so rich, like a few minutes of really deep knowledge. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to make two quick observations and then have a question for you. One observation is, I want to just double click on that last point about, integrating your whole team and really sharing and kind of making this an inclusive exercise, because having been a CEO before in kind of multiple roles, there is nothing worse than someone like me coming back from a 12-week experience with all sorts of ideas that, he's cooked up in his head that the team knows nothing about. That is a disaster. So having been that disaster before, I just want to kind of name that you had a better approach. Second one is that I would just point out that everything Erasma talked about, both the TA and also the expansion, was work that they were already doing. This was part of what they wanted to achieve. This was not as if they were going to do fellowship and they kind of came up with a couple of new things that were completely separate from the work that they were doing. The fellowship really is meant to be an accelerator, meaning let's get your organization on that rocket ship to get to where you already want to get to quicker. And maybe we can help you refine where that is and maybe some of the intermediate steps. But think about this really incorporates the work that's already going on and tries to bring an accelerant to it. And then just the follow-up question is, you use the term, kind of hands-on. It's funny, it must be an arms and hands thing, because we roll up your sleeves, Can you just like debunk what that means for people? It's like, oh, what hands-on, what does that mean? Does that mean that they, they have an hour meeting instead of a half hour? Like, as one example, Erasma, I remember we literally were like going back and forth with you as you were creating a price list for TA. Like, hey, what do we charge? Like, what's my time worth? And how do we think about that? And I think we literally sort of helped you build a price list and a pricing model underneath it. And kind of, to me, that's what the hands-on is. It's literally like being in the artifacts, being in the work together, as opposed to just kind of, us giving you advice and then going away. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
That's right. It wasn't, you all providing the guidance and the direction. It was us laying basically the framework for what it is that we wanted to achieve. And you're supporting us in the thinking and the details, right? In the details of how are you going to get to that specific goal. And I think that your probing questions for us really led to us thinking concretely about the steps that we needed to take in order to get ourselves to the place that we wanted to, whether it was, scaling and retention for our team, which, by the way, I didn't mention this, but I'll mention it now. We grew from 32 last year, and now we're at 54 this year, just to give you a sense of our scale and, the concrete steps we took to get there. And then on the technical assistance side was really understanding whether or not there was a niche market for us, really almost like triaging all of the calls that we were receiving. And then through that, feeding that information back to the Promise team and saying, okay, what are your thoughts about this? How do you think this can work for us in the long run? And it was absolutely incredibly helpful. And we have something that we're really proud of.
Just amazing. Rasma, thank you.
Sure.
So Jessica Toe is our next speaker, and Jessica is CEO of Huckleberry Labs. I just love that brand name and the logo and the whole thing. It just feels like early childhood. And Jessica's a neuroscientist, and I think of Jessica as like so focused and seeing the clear through line, or you know, the true north on bringing parenting solutions at scale to all children and families. And she'll talk about like anchoring Huckleberry and where they are and where they're headed and so forth. But this is one of the great examples of, I think, an entrepreneur from the very early stages planning for scale and trying to figure out what would it take and how do I make choices at the very early stages to have something that is scalable and can reach families in every community. Jessica, I'm recalling that you came to the fellowship last year with the goal of, and these are my words, so please feel free to refresh them, but the goal of really building an impact model for the first time and thinking very intentionally about how to reach children facing the greatest needs where they were. They were presenting in communities where you didn't currently have customers, and just to focus on more than just the month-over-month growth of a tech-based application, but to also focus not just on how much we're growing, but where we're growing and how we're growing and how do we reach people that are facing the greatest adversity. And the greatest accomplishment during that period was not just everything in the fellowship, but the fact that Jessica also brought a new baby girl into the world. So it can be done. And we did everything to support Jessica on there, but she nailed it on her own. So Jessica, I'll turn it over to you with the question as well of how has the pandemic affected the work of Huckleberry and what's the current state?
Yes, thank you so much. So the pandemic for us actually has increased demand. What we do is we provide access to specialist guidance for less than a copay. And we are able to do this because we pair AI with human experts, making what they do just 90% more efficient without sacrificing the efficacy and specificity of what they do. And so with the pandemic and all the families being stuck at home and they're trying to work and they've got their kids and, I feel like parents, they have this certain threshold of tolerance that they can manage. But, and so at some point it's like, okay, I really need some guidance and help. And so we saw during the pandemic, month over month, there's just like increasing over 30%. And so we've been scaling up our ability to serve families. And so slight correction, you mentioned I was a neuroscientist. I think you meant data scientist. Yeah. So the difference with, where we were coming in with our background versus some of the other teams is that we didn't have the early childhood science background ourselves. We did bring on experts, but the core of our team was really on the AI and data side. And so, and we were early stage, we were venture backed, but full time we were 4 people, along with the host of experts that we brought on, that we work with. So, our focus had been more on scale. We just signed on our 500,000th family on our platform, and mostly in the U.S., but still around the world. So we had that mostly in the bag, but that was also something the fellowship had helped us with. But really, our main focus was on the impact side and wanting to be deliberate about how do we make sure that we are in line with the early childhood science, and also making sure that we're not missing the most vulnerable families and families facing adversity, and understanding also how to fit into this system. coming from a more software background, I just learned so much about the other organizations in the cohort, but also the whole landscape and system. And so you have like different kinds of providers. You have organizations at the community level, you have population health organizations, and you have other for-profit organizations like ourselves. And then also education and ones in the medical space. And so what we wanted to do was be able to talk to people in these different organizations, get an understanding of how we might fit in to helping families who are facing adversity, and then also building out what our theory of change is and how we fit into the science of early childhood. And so what has been really instrumental in that was both Promise Venture Studio and also the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, and being able to access the experts in both of these areas. And now it sounds like you guys are also going to get access to people at Sesame Workshop, which is amazing. So so that it's just been incredible. It's like, you know, when Michael had said hands-on, they really were. It was like almost too good to be true. Like, wow, you're going to spend all this time with me for free to help accelerate the things that we knew were important to us. And I do want to also highlight, you really want to choose things that you would do even if you weren't a part of the fellowship. Like, these are things that are important, and you know, they're things that you would do anyway, but with the help of being in this fellowship is going to accelerate that. And the other thing is, I think some of you may be wondering, like, is this something I have time for? What kind of time commitment? So if it's something that you're already going to do anyway, then it doesn't feel like extra time. Also, as Michael mentioned, I had a baby during this time, and the awesome thing is that they don't have like, these are our set times, and you know, you have to work around that schedule. It was, they made it so that it worked within your schedule too. And so this was my third baby, so like, it was kind of like I've been through that whole rodeo before. And so so even like I think like the week after I had a baby, I still like dialed into something just because like I felt that was okay for me. But they didn't push that. They were like, you know, if you need to take time, you can. And so that's what I also really appreciated about this. The other thing was that you know, it mentioned just even applying gets you on the radar. I'll add that before the Promise Fellowship, they had something called Early Futures Fellowship, and I had applied to that, and I did not get accepted to that. But from after that, then I had conversation with Matt and Gabe, I believe, and just started to get to know them more. They gave some good pointers. Like, I understood, like, I think what didn't come across in my application. And for us, it was that I think I did not have enough clarity on the impact that we wanted to have. And I had pretty much just talked about typical software kind of stuff about scale and things. And so, so literally just applying got us on the radar. And then ever since then, like, I've gotten so much out of the different connections and guidance from the fellowship, and also what has happened ongoing from there.
Jessica, thanks for great sharing. Just a couple of quick follow-ups. One is there's a question from Valentina about whether your app is available in anything other than English.
It is only English at this point, yes, but in the future we would like to expand to beyond English. And
then the second follow-up would be, can you talk a little bit about, I know you came into this fellowship on your own without a senior leader, but right. There was support from other ventures, and you got to obviously meet other folks. And has any of that turned into either, personal support relationships or business partnerships, or just kind of, well-informed entrepreneurs or other experts that you can call on when needed? What does that support look like today, that network that was formed with the fellowship?
Yeah, I through this I met organizations I probably never would have otherwise. Just one recently, actually, like a connection with the FIND program out of University of Oregon that you had facilitated, Michael, and they were also part of the fellowship where, we're doing things that are more at scale, a little more hands-off with families, whereas the organization through the University of Oregon, they're more one-on-one with families. And so, so as an example, like we were able to send some people who may need a little bit more hand-holding over to their organization. And also just being able to help, like there's another organization who they were more hands-on and wanted to provide something through an app digitally. And so I was able to provide my thoughts anyway on what that could look like and things to think about. So I think it's just so great to be able to expand beyond your existing bubble and to get the like the different kinds of backgrounds and also thought processes, and just seeing how there's so much else going on to serve families that we may never be able to do, but together collectively can meet all the different needs of families.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And, like as an entrepreneur myself, one of the things I've, really struggled with over time is you're always on low beam. Like all the lights are pointed right in front of the car. You're very focused. It's hard to see the field, but something like fellowship gives you the opportunity to pop up at the high beams, and you just, you understand what's there that you had your head, down too much to really see. Quick question from Daryl about when did your birth occur in terms of the fellowship? Because one of his key staff is due in October, so he's trying to figure out if that's possible.
Yes. So I had my baby in August 14th, so just turned 11 months. And let's see, the fellowship was from July to September, right?
Yeah. You nailed it right in the middle.
Yeah.
Great.
So I think it wouldn't have been great maybe if it was right at the beginning, but it worked out.
So thank you, Jessica. And one thing I would just note for you guys is that one of the real ways that we see the growth in Jessica's impact model is the way she talks about it in her pitch. When we first saw her pitch, it was kind of a little bit of, hinted at. Now it's really integrated in multiple ways within her pitch. And I think that's been a really valuable asset to create in video for Huckleberry going forward. So Kai Hamer is our third and definitely last but not least speaker, and she is Parent Corps Manager. And Kai participated in the fellowship last year along with her CEO, Lori Brotman. Parent Corps, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure Kai will tell you more about it, and its very timely mission, is a scaling organization within New York City, really deep scaling within New York City through the Department of Education and across multiple boroughs and communities. So that's an example of really going deep and kind of wide within one, obviously very, very large market. But Kai and Lori wanted, most of all, I think last year, if memory serves, Kai, to sort of figure out what growth to other communities and cities would take. What would it look like to start envisioning that? That was a case where you guys were on a low beam in a serious way in New York. And what would it take to both think about strategically where to go next, and then also, what would you need to build in terms of the assets to be able to have conversations with potentially community partners and funders outside of New York. So it is great to be back with you, Kai. It has not been that long because we've continued to do work with you, but what a treat to be back. How's Parent Corps schools, leaders, and families faring in the pandemic?
Thank you, Michael, and hello to all. Parent Corps in the pandemic, we had to go virtual with everything rather quickly. We went remote with everything quickly. That's with our team. Everybody started working from home. But then even with our program, A little bit of background, Parent Corps is an evidence-based program, is delivered in schools and pre-K programs, largely serving Black and brown children and families, racial equity centered. So we're school-based, and the work we do is school-based. So what happens when all the schools close? We had to transition to virtual programming, and we're able to run some tests and had some schools say, we want to still continue the program virtually, even though our physical doors are shuttered. Some learning took place, but we really wanted to center the needs of both our staff, because in order to do great work, staff have to have care for themselves, and we have people losing family members and friends because of COVID, and then seeing that in our school communities. So we wanted to be sensitive to that. So holding both the human side of the people and their hearts, and also trying to keep the workflow going. Interesting challenge that I believe that we rose to the occasion on, and we continue to do that good work. My fellowship experience overall was a very powerful one for me, specifically because I have been to things that I would believe were like this before. And it can be quite intimidating to enter into a space where at least I'm perceiving people to be experts, and people are CEOs and they're scientists, and they're coming with all of these expertise. And then I say, well, I am among them. But then I come into the space, and what I would assume to be maybe a pretentious space, for me, didn't land that way. Was really unpretentious and real, and where I was able to make true connections with the coaches, and also with the other cohort members that were there. I think people showed up genuinely and honestly to both help and support each other, and get good feedback and learning from the coaches. One thing we were asked on the very first call was to speak candidly about what our weaknesses were, about what we needed. I think Erasmus spoke a little bit about this, but really being honest about your goals, what you wanted to do, and to be truthful about where the needs are, because the goal is to get supported around what you want to do and where those weaknesses are, help to make those weaknesses stronger. And you couldn't do that if you are hiding behind what you do well. You have to kind of like let that guard down and actually say, in our case, in Parent Corps' case, we're a strong evidence-based program rooted with powerful RCT evidence. Some people don't have that. Some people have another skill set. Ours was like robust RCT data, gold standard. And we have all this beautiful outcomes and academic improvement, mental health improvement for children, behavioral improvement, physical health improvement, and all the data's all lined up. But how do we get this out there? How do we spread this beautifulness in what ways? What's an intelligent way to do it? What's our plan to scale? We didn't have that. We didn't have that. And I'm glad that we didn't hide just behind what we did well, which is our science and our evidence, so that we could get support coming up with a plan that's viable to scale. I did this as a senior manager alongside my executive director, the creator, the founder. So this is her science. I am a practitioner. I came to Parent Corps as a teacher and a special education teacher and a dean of a school in the Bronx who went to the Parent Corps training. Parent Corps has training, it has a parenting program component, it has a social emotional learning component for the classroom. And so I came from one world to the other and sort of rose. So here I am doing this with the woman who created this, and this is her baby. And she's like grooming me to take over and saying, here is my baby. And our relationship grew because of my ability to actually challenge my own skills and strengths and see my own value, to actually say, boss, I think this is the direction that we should go in, and get the support from the coaches to do that, because she's like passing the torch and clearly saying, I am what was, and you are the future, and I'm supporting you in doing that, and still challenged to say, boss, you might be mistaken here, or having the opportunity to learn or to lead. So that was an interesting dynamic I learned something from my boss. She's not on a call, about leadership, about gracefully stepping aside, and is teaching me something about having the right folks around you and letting those folks lead. And so I'm grateful to the fellowship for allowing that to be, for allowing the truth of that to be. Because it's one thing to your goals, you will create goals that feel real and realistic, but there's learnings that come that were not a goal, that we didn't necessarily write down and say, this is exactly what we want to learn. Those for us were met, but there are other learnings along the way that I perhaps didn't expect to learn, that I believe that the fellowship drew out. And for those things, I am the most grateful. And if I have to say, what advice would I give to new fellows coming on, I would say, speak your truth, to be honest, and to expose your weakness that is safe to do so for your own growth, for your own learning. In this fellowship, I felt safe to say, I don't know. And that's not always, you don't always have the room to do that, especially in a room full of experts and in a room full of people who are very knowledgeable, to create a space where someone can say, I actually don't know, and have not only the coaches, but also the other participants say, I can help you with that. So that was really, really powerful as well.
Terrific. Kai, as usual, you really put things with an exclamation point and kind of underscore the real messages. Couple follow-up questions for you. One is, when did it get tough? Were there tight spots? Were there spots where you woke up and said, you got to be kidding me? On top of everything else I got to do this by next Tuesday?
Oh my goodness, if I'm most honest, we struggle with time management. So, we would have the calls, and there's work to do post calls. And so you're trying to do the work at the same time where you have your everyday responsibilities to do. A couple of times it'd be like 2 hours before we're supposed to have our coaching calls. Like, did we do it? Did we do the homework? Did we move on this thing? So that to me was the challenge. That to me was the challenge, was really the time management. And it makes you question the seriousness to reach that goal, because you make the time for what's important.
Another follow-up, Kai, and maybe it's particularly interesting for Parent Corps, is that, we talk about 12-week experience, but of course, the experience of being within the Promise community is not bounded by 12 weeks or any number of weeks. And also, when you think about your growth goal, your impact goal, it doesn't necessarily fit tightly within 12 weeks. It may have a much longer tail afterward. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like for Parent Corps, and what sort of post-fellowship, how you accessed support both within your community of peer fellows and with Promise or HCDC?
Yeah, we stayed very connected, seeing the value of all the coaches and all the connections, and you really become part of a community, from the Slack channel, getting plenty of updates, to the opportunity to apply for other opportunities. To prepare for this call, I went and I was like, okay, let me review the goals that we had. And one was to create a sustainable business model strategic plan for scale in urban areas. And we just finished the strategic plan for our organization. And here we are a whole year later, and we were able to continue to tap Michael, frankly, for continued support with that. So it really, it doesn't end. I feel very connected, like I can always ask for help and get support, get a email with a calendar to snatch 30 minutes, to get some mentoring, to get some continued push forward and some continued answers. Yeah, a year later, and I'm still talking about Promising Venture Studios to whoever I can say it to. Yeah.
Thanks on that. So just to all three of you, as we sort of close up here, any last reflections? One thing, by the way, we didn't talk much about, if anybody wants to jump in and talk about the adaptive challenge or the peer group huddles, which is kind of a subgroup within the fellowship. We didn't really get into that. So that's fair game. Any other sort of closing comments you want to make? And then I'm going to jump into talking more about, specifics for application in the final few minutes. So I'll open the floor.
I did some thinking about the adaptive challenge because of the process of the adaptive challenge, which was to write up an adaptive challenge that you have something that your organization is working through. And then we were in like mini groups. So your mini group of like organizations get to see your adaptive challenge, go into the document, make a few comments and ask some questions. And then when we go on to the call, they look at your challenge, they talk about it, they can ask you a few questions, and then silence. You, as the entrepreneur for your venture, get shut down and quieted, and you hear like a fishbowl of other people and other organizations talking through your problem. And it's like, whoa, I think the process of it, hearing people talk through our problem was interesting, learning. I mean, it drove home the idea that different perspectives matter, and to come out and then for someone else to then go in and look at what your particular problem was. It was just groundbreaking. And we got a lot of little nuggets on how we can move through our problem. And then we do it for another organization. And so that was, I just wanted to note the process of that. I had not ever been a part of something like that. And I just thought it was really powerful, and we got a lot out of it.
Yeah, for us is the same thing. As I mentioned, we are a relatively young organization. We're 5 years old, and a lot of our team members are young in their experience, right? We come from different backgrounds. And one of the adaptive challenges was to try to figure out how do we create a more collaborative environment, and how do we build capacity and create professional development opportunities. And we spent some time really thinking through what would be the correct process to better support our team members. And as a result, we were able to develop a very specific professional development component to our work. We hired a learning and development specialist who now, develops curriculum and conducts training for our team. So those of us, that are new to certain roles or feel that we have a deficit in some way, which we don't talk about deficits, we talk more about assets in our organization. They feel supported, and they feel that they have a place to go to ask the question. But we wouldn't have reached that in the time frame without having that opportunity to really think it through with the cohorts as part of the fellowship. So we're really grateful for that.
Yeah, just to quickly add, I totally agree. It was such an interesting exercise, not only to hear other people talk about the challenges that you're trying to work on, but to hear other people's, and you realize like some of these are either you've gone through it or you're going to go through it. But what I really appreciate is, as you could see, this fellowship is very balanced. So you have the adaptive challenges. So like those are more organizational types of things versus impact and also growth. And so it really is this holistic thing that is all of those parts need to work for the organization to thrive and to help families. And then also want to emphasize that after the 12 weeks, it was not one and done. They weren't like, okay, bye, see you, up into the world you go. But to this day, I mean, I get so much out of the continued relationships, and it's been incredible.
Well, you guys are amazing. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for taking time out of your incredibly busy days to speak to the community and be reflective. I think just, from my own personal perspective, it's just so cool to see growth and wins and traction, and like also a little bit like squirmy little grins about the adaptive challenge, because it's just all part of it. So we really appreciate what you guys do. Hey, I have a couple of things we'll follow up on from Q&A here. One is about whether or not it's any of you are in the idea stage. And I'll answer that for everybody and say, no, these were, each of the three of these were, scaling ventures I think Parent Corps being probably the most mature, maybe Huckleberry being the earliest stage. But I think what you may have noticed is that there were a lot of offshoots of that were ideas, and like, how do I create a TA package? How do I? So I think there are opportunities to be innovative within an existing organization. And if you are in the idea stage, that's not necessarily a disqualification for the fellowship. So we'd love to hear from you. And if it's too early and we don't feel like we can serve you right, there are other ways we can serve you. So we'd again, get in the game, and we'd love to learn about it. The other quick question was about learnings from the first cohort, and like, what did we reflect on as a group with HCDC and Promise? And just a couple quick things. One is, we learned that it's important to be very intentional about the user experience of the fellow and make sure that we don't like cascade things and create lumpiness to the 12 weeks. There were a few periods where we kind of got overlapped on top of each other for various different programming demands. And I think that was a little bit of challenging things that we've ironed out for this year. We're going to try to make it a little bit smaller because we think that will help in terms of our bandwidth a bit. We've made some accommodations, obviously, to go all virtual, which are really key and make all kinds of sense, although the vast majority of the work was virtual. And then finally, I would say that there is this recognition that the real power of this fellowship is about connecting each other. And so we're going to be even more intentional this year about trying to create partnerships, connections, free thinking about how can organizations work together within the fellowship and also obviously outside of that. So just a couple of quick things there. I'm going to jump on now and just get to the fellowship application next steps, because I think it's really important that we just run through these in the final minutes. Here are the details and the links. Obviously, the time is relatively short. We got a couple of weeks, but we'd love to see everybody jump in as quickly as we can. The program dates are September 3rd through December 18th, and then it is attached to a show and tell event, which is a connection event for you with funders and with field experts on January 21st. So think about it really as kind of running through January, although the bulk of that work will be done before the holiday period in December. So who are we looking for? I mean, this is a great visual because, essentially what it tells me is you really can come from any direction, right? So we want to, whether you're an academic on one side that's impact oriented, or if you're, purely scale oriented on the other side, we want to move you toward a combination of those two things. And you can really find that from any particular direction. Whoops, didn't move. There we go. So the venture application has two pieces. It has the venture profile first. If you're already in the community, you don't need to do that. And then it sort of has everything else, of which there's the formal fellowship application, including a 1-minute introductory video, the impact and growth goals. Here's some questions about how to really parse those down. I think they're also in the application, but I would just double down and say again, I think that is the most important part of the application, and the one that requires the most kind of careful, deliberate thought. There also are questions that are obviously confidential and won't be shared out about annual budget and so forth, and those are important for us to understand sort of what's possible for you, and if not, how we might be able to help. Your venture profile, I don't have time to go through all of this, but if you haven't filled it out, this is kind of the short form, and we'll provide out this deck, by the way, afterwards, so don't scribble down or do screenshots unless you want to. But these are just different ways to think about filling out that venture profile. That is a living document that is your asset to the field. So that's your first introduction to everybody in the field. Funders hit that every day. So take care with that. That's, again, sort of a first win of even applying. And then finally, next week, we have some additional support. So Thursday of next week at 1 Eastern, and then Friday at 1 Eastern, we essentially just have a virtual Q&A about the application. So if you're deep into the application, have questions, or if you just had stuff today that you couldn't get to, this is your opportunity to kind of work as a team and pull it off together. There's a question I'm seeing jumping up from Christina about have we ever worked with a county office? We do it all the time, not in fellowship. We'd love to. We'd actually love to do more with government. So Christina, we'd love to know more about what you and your peers in government are up to. And I think that's it. We're at time. So again, Jessica, Rasma, Kai, grateful thanks to you guys for what you've done and what you continue to do every day for children and families. And for everybody else, we hope to see you apply and learn more about you and get to know you and work with you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.